Welcome to the Rebel Teacher Podcast, the flagship podcast for the Rebel Teacher Network. And I'm here again with Lee Darg. We talked last time about the vision and the direction that we're trying to take the Rebel Teacher Network in. And in that conversation, if you haven't seen it yet, we picked up quite a lot of different topics and threads we didn't have enough time to explore in great depth. So today we're going to pick one of those up and see where we can take it. And today, I think Lee and I are going to talk about vocational and academic studies in the school system and beyond. So we mentioned that quite a lot in the last episode. And if you haven't seen that one yet, maybe check that out before this one. Pause now, and that'll give you a good place to see where we start and some of the things we said on it before. But Lee, as I said, this came up a lot in our previous chat. We never really delved into it as its own topic, as we're going to do now. So what are your kind of first thoughts, your opening thoughts on this idea of academic and vocational studies, perhaps as it is now, or what problems you see with that idea, what future you see for it? What are your opening thoughts?
Yeah, so good to be with you again, Karl. I've had shifting opinions on this over the years. I've kind of flip-flopped between positions, but I think, I think I've come to a bit of a conclusion where I now sit. It started off with nobody does anything vocational, and then it moved on to well, is there really a divide? And then I was like, well, no, we need to put vocational training in because it really doesn't happen. There's too much focus on academic, and one could spin off into the problems I and others have with league tables and exam results and all this. But I have come back to the conclusion, well, actually, no, we already do it, but what we don't do is recognize it properly.
Right. Sure.
So, for example, if somebody is studying a scientific subject, if somebody is studying chemistry, they spend a lot of time in college and university level, at least, in their lab coats, with the Bunsen burner doing the practical elements, but there's so much theory and so much research to do as well. So, but it's seen as an academic study. And then, even other things which are so obviously seen as vocational, such as physical education or becoming a fitness instructor or something like that, that's massively vocational, and certainly the practice of it is almost all hands-on and practical. But of course, there's a lot of study around nutrition and all sorts of things that are very academic. So, yeah, I think I've come to the conclusion that we do a lot of it, but it isn't recognised properly and are on the same level as what we would call academic. So we've created a false divide, and now we're kind of trying to stitch it back together.
Yeah, sure. I think the point about level is important, and I'm sure that's probably something we'll spend a lot of time talking about, the attitude towards these two as compared sides of the system. I wonder if it's worth thinking about a definition, because a couple of the things that you said there, I think I agree with most of what you've just said. I'm not sure if I might describe or define the two ideas perhaps slightly differently than you would, and so I see if you agree or not. But if we're trying to just define the concepts of vocational and academic, I would suggest that what we mean by vocational is, and some of the examples you mentioned when you said, for example, becoming a physiotherapist, for example, right? So for me, when we talk about vocational, it's study for application, and usually professional application, right? So you're studying with a view to becoming something, and you're developing the skills that will be applied when you become that thing. Whereas academic seems to me that it's more about studying for the sake of expanding knowledge, deepening understanding, but not with any particular view to how that will be applied. It's just a case of amassing more knowledge. And so that's how I would, do you agree with that, or is there a different way you might define them?
No, I think, again, it's this kind of, we see it as a divide when in reality they're kind of stitched together. I know in the
you go ahead.
Yeah, I know one person that I've thought about to contest, is there actually a divide? Really what you're talking about of, how much of the study then goes on to be practical application. The best example I know of a student who I think went to Oxford, they did loads of reading, lots of studying, lots of exams, virtually no time out of the library or the classroom, but then their job, they never touched a book again. And then when you think of Indiana Jones in his career,
Right.
you know, it is a switch from one thing to the other. But I think you know, we've used, I use science as an example. There is a lot of practical that has to be done to back up the theory and the academic.
Right.
So, but when they come out, they're still having to have a balance. I mean, in a workplace, you know, if you are having to one day do a bit of reading and then another day go out and do something in another office or on a work site, we don't have this same split, do we? We don't look at work and say, right, well, you're either academic or vocational. We just call it work, and it's all blended together. So we should, I think, be talking about education, and therefore what is included in it, or the different methods don't matter. Well, not that they don't matter, but they've created this divide of academic versus vocational, and really we should just be talking about learning. And
no, I agree. I think there is a bit of a difference here, and I want to see if we can nail this down and see if that moves us along in the conversation, and also a slightly different journey to the same conclusion, I think. So as far as the definition goes, I would say that there are two separate dichotomies there. When on the one hand you talk about theory versus practical, it seems to me you're kind of overlapping. So theory is academic and vocational is practical. For me, I'd keep those as two separate dichotomies. Theory and practice on the one hand, and we can talk about that. Vocational and academic on the other, and we can talk about that. And for me, theory and practical, if they are applied, then they both become vocational. If you're doing theory, you know, if you're studying theory and you're doing practical experiments in the lab, but only for the sake of getting to the next unit or passing the test or whatever else, then the fact that it's a practical experiment doesn't make it vocational, because you're not thinking about how that will be applied in the real world. So for me, vocational has this relationship to real world application, and then the bit about the journey to the conclusion. I therefore think that all study, there will be theory, there will be practical, as you say, just as there is in the workplace. But I think all education should be vocational. And the academic, or at least the majority, you know, there will be things that people want to study for the interest of studying, but mainstream education should focus on the vocational, meaning that we take both the theory and the practical and look at how they're applied in the real world. And that makes theory,
maybe we went down the wrong direction to start with, because all education really should be about is doing. So technically it's all
exactly
vocational.
Right, So
but
I think everything should be applied.
Yes, absolutely. I would go with that, actually, because I mean, I'm sensing we kind of need a 3D Venn diagram here, because they are overlapping. It reminds me of the classic problem when people talk about English and maths, when what they're really talking about is literacy and numeracy, which of course are linked, but they're not the same thing, and they are different studies. So I'll go with you. I think there is a blend and there's an overlap of everything, but I will go with you. There's almost two sort of parallel things going on there. I think that's a good definition.
And to pick up the fields that you've just referenced, to go with English as the example, like you say, on the one hand, English as a field of study, and then, you know, reading and writing and literacy on the other. Just to clarify the point, reading, writing, literacy, those things, I think we would consider, or I would consider those vocational, where studying, you know, reading the plays of Shakespeare, I would probably consider academic, right? You don't read the plays of Shakespeare necessarily to apply them, unless you, I mean, even then, maybe you're going to become a stage actor, in which case it's a vocation. But if you're reading because you enjoy the act of reading, and you want to just be able to have more interesting conversations with other people who like Shakespeare, then that's an academic pursuit. It's not a vocation.
Yeah, just interesting there. I mean, we could do a separate podcast on one day on my issues around treating Shakespeare's plays as novels in the first place. But,
you're quite right.
The reading of them is interesting, because you brought in the word. Another word for work is a vocation. So that, I think, in and of itself shows that there are these overlapping concepts that are all related.
But I just wish that it were made more transparent. So I mean, your Indiana Jones example I really like, because he was, I mean, I don't know Indiana Jones, but I know the reference, and your description is edifying enough to say, obviously he studied at university an academic subject. And then later in life, he realized, oh, I can apply my learning in this, heavily practical vocational field. Well, you've got the dichotomy there between academic on the one hand and vocational on the other. But I just think that was a wasted opportunity in the school environment, where all of that stuff he was learning as an academic subject, the teachers, the lecturers, the instructors could have made clearer the possibility for application. And I think this is the problem that we see in school at all levels, from primary right through to college, university, is kids are learning things in the classroom. And when they ask what it's for, they're told so that you get a score, so that you pass the test, so that you're prepared for your midterms, whatever else. That's what they're being told that they're learning for.
Yes.
Many years down the line, they might be trying to solve a problem and think, oh, this is like that thing I learned in school. Where what should happen is, in school, when they say, what's this for? The teacher should say, oh, this will help you solve these kinds of problems. And then you're taking something that's usually treated academically and turning it into applied vocational study. And almost everything that we learn in school can be applied, but most of what we learn in school, we don't realize how it can be applied. And I think that's the big problem.
That leads to the famous thing I'm often told by sort of young people of I'm now 21 and I've still not used Pythagoras' theorem outside the classroom, isn't it?
Right.
But the principles, are often there, and often we don't.
And of course, just to push back a little bit on that, because I agree with you. But there are people who do, right? If you're an architect,
yes,
then
exactly.
you would be using it, right? And so it should be made clearer at the time of instruction. You'll find this useful if you ever want to do this, that, or the other. And if you don't, well, maybe you don't need to bother.
And the principles there about using numbers in a particular way and measuring and all the other stuff that come into absolutely. So the principles are there, and also we should try and have a little bit of everything in the quote classroom unquote, because then if you have 50 things available in a buffet, you're going to have 50 people interested in a different area. But I think that's important. I'm just going to bring in a third element. Actually, my Venn diagram is becoming very confused. There's a third element we perhaps don't. We talk about sometimes we don't think about enough as being part of the school experience, certainly in this country, in the UK, 11 to 18, of the fabled careers advice. Now, the model is very broken because, of course, the problem is now that we first of all ask a 14-year-old before they start the GCSEs, tell me what you want to do with the rest of your life, which, of course, is an inherently ridiculous question to ask a 14-year-old in most cases. And we also then are still assuming that we have what we would call the cliche as a job for life. Well, we no longer have that.
I literally was on, because I was on Sufyan's podcast just today, and we had a conversation where essentially the same thing came up. Essentially, we're just lying to kids at the school age when we pretend that you will be in the same job for the rest of your life. Exactly.
So I think that moves on to sort of I don't know what term to use, but like life advice, this thing should talk about careers and going for a job interview, but it should also talk about, what is the difference between these types of bank account? How do you apply for a mortgage, and what's the benefits over renting, or the pros and cons? All these sorts of things that we assume people should just pick up when they leave school, unless they're introduced to it. So I think there's a third element here. Academic, if we're to really whittle it down into the cliches, academic is about getting a grade after reading lots of books. Vocational is about perhaps still getting a grade, but after doing something practical with your hands. That's the actual subject study, but there is this other strand, isn't there, or this other level about developing. We do a lot now, quite rightly, from a young age, about how teaching children how to form effective relationships, learning about consent and all that sort of thing. That doesn't fit. We certainly don't score them on that. So there's another thing going on in schools.
I guess
schools are teachers end up having a bit of social, social services. That's too strong, but there's that element in there of kind of in loco
social development. Absolutely. No, I mean, I agree, but also, I mean, that's why I'm still. You mentioned there how vocational is. You said still for getting a grade, but after doing something with your hands. That for me is using that definition of practice
Yeah.
rather than vocational. So
The
for
old
me, I would
divide.
say the purpose is not for grades, the purpose is for application. And whether it's doing something with your hands or doing something, as it were, with your mind, as long as it's applied, then it fits into the category of vocational. But then, you know, as well, you're right, the word vocational we think of as a
Yeah.
professional term. We think of it
Practical.
job related. But the examples that you just brought up, mortgages and, you know, investments, job interviews, these are all just applications as far as I'm concerned. So when you talk about, you know, the whether to rent or buy, or how to apply for a mortgage and how to pay your taxes, well, these are applied maths, right? These belong in a math lesson. They don't belong, I think, necessarily in some subject called you know, life skills or life advice or life support. They're how we should be in your maths lesson. When you say, what are we learning this for? Instead of the answer being so that you're prepared for the test, the answer should be, oh, well, you'll use this when you're paying your taxes. You'll use this when you're working out your mortgage. And then it's just applied learning.
There can be
vocational,
that. Yeah, I mean, school not being about grades is our ultimate goal, right?
Absolutely,
But the interesting thing there, I mean, I think of the arts and humanities area. So, you know, I always wondered, bearing in mind I'm a rubbish, you know, I can't draw very well. My horses and cats are things of legend, but I can't draw very well, and therefore I always scored very low in art. But there was no attempt to. But then, how could you? How could you score effort, or you know, the fact that I naturally can't draw isn't my fault. Having a go, should that be scored? And how do you, so the scoring of when did World War II start and end is an easy thing in history, but the scoring of, you know, explain the nature of this painting. I mean, that's an area where, and I know I'm going a bit down the cliche of practical and whatever again, but that's an area where I find it really difficult. You know, when somebody does drama, well, how on earth are you? How do we do score drama recitals? Well, what on earth are the criteria for being able to score someone's ability to act? It just doesn't. So the scoring methodology, whilst you and I challenge it anyway, it does fit a more classically academic approach, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And what I mean, what I'm going to say now is going to sound a little bit too what's the word? Too
rebellious?
Abstract. No, I think in this it's too abstract, but I would suggest what's happening already is. So I was going to say with art, for example, you know, the reality is not everybody needs to be a great artist. If you look at the professional landscape, the number of people who become professional artists and, you know, make their living in art as a career is, of course, vanishingly small. So the fact that we, you know, as a teacher or as a school, you would insist that everybody must get a, you know, a passing grade in art as a subject, when you know that only less than 1% of those students are actually going to use that in their life. It doesn't seem like it should be something we spend so much time and energy on, but it doesn't. I think it's an incredibly important subject. I think art shouldn't be therefore ignored, because it's not just a professional exploit. You know, the appreciation and the enjoyment of art is something that I think is very valuable. So then, rather than only grading you on your ability to draw a horse or a cat, maybe we could spend more time just asking students how art makes them feel. What do you think about this? But then how could you grade that? It sounds so abstract, but isn't it very abstract if you're trying to grade someone's picture of a horse anyway? Because I might come along and say that doesn't look much like a horse, and you might say, yeah, well, I was inspired by Picasso. And then where does the grading?
That's why it has a leg on its head, exactly.
So it's already abstract. The fact that you can't, you know, it's already subjective, and so the fact that you might say, well, how could you grade one person's opinion of art? Well, you don't need to grade it, but I do think that we should be spending time on those kinds of questions in an art class as much as on the, you know, studying the accurate history of who influenced whom and the ability to draw yourself.
Yeah, even there, with or without an ear, even there, it is the case, isn't it, though, that other subjects which we see as traditionally markable. I mean, I gave a very tedious example of when did World War, you know, II start and end. I mean, that you could mark as it's either right or wrong. But if I then say to you, you know, in an exam question, describe the events that led up to the start of the First World War.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, what you then do is you don't actually have a critique of what you think the answer to the question is. You are to bring in that wonderful phrase, you have been taught to the test, because you'll have been taught a set curriculum.
You
with
know exactly the timeline of who met with whom, and exactly right.
Yeah, exactly. Who was involved, what dates there were, what country they burst into. And so it's difficult, because I mean, we're sort of going down the line now of grading, which we both agree, and many others do, that is not the right way to go about it. But it is difficult, because then when you go into the subjects that are, what would we call them, softer skills, or whatever we call them, like the arts and humanities, it becomes very difficult to score. But then this goes back to, you know, tying back to academic and vocational. Whilst I appreciate I have used a divide that isn't quite fair in all cases, you know, the practical act of boiling an egg that, say, takes 4 minutes, then, you know, the academic level is, well, there's a number involved. It has to be 4 minutes, and I have to do it in this way, and I have to learn a certain process. And so I do agree that it becomes, the line between academic and vocational becomes blurred there. But then I suppose that's kind of where I started off, isn't it, in a way? That
exactly, yeah, that's and that's where
blurred.
And I agree. I think that they should be, and that's why, as long as that definition is looking at what's practical, I think, you know, even theory can be for applied reasons. So I mean, you use that example of boiling an egg there. I mean, if you're doing the maths, you can make that a lesson on theory, and it can be an academic pursuit, until you say, and if you know this, you'll be able to boil the perfect egg. Well, now it's applied. That's all it takes to turn something into applied learning. And the two subjects that have come up so far in our conversation, we've mentioned maths at one point, and you've just mentioned history and the humanities. Maths and history are the two subjects that I struggle the most with when I have the conversation of application, because I believe, and this is the stance that I take, is that all learning should be applied. Everything that's taught in a classroom should be applied. Everything should have a real world function. Whether or not that's professional is a different question, but some real world application that the students can you know, see how the learning relates to their environment in one way or another. Everything should be that way. And the two subjects that I have the most trouble putting that argument forth for are maths, because it's so abstract, and history, because it's in the past. But even there, in both of those, I feel it can be done. History is the easiest thing, I think, for me to express, just because I'm struggle with maths. But in history, you know, you can spend a good amount of time, rather than just memorizing the dates that things happened on, which, let's face it, is actually the least important part of history studies. It doesn't matter if it was it June the 10th or June the 11th, who cares? But if you can instead focus your efforts on, okay, the world that we live in today, is there anything that happened in that event or in that timeline, that sequence of events, that we can learn from, that will help us now, today, have a better society and improve our situation today based on what we've learned from the past? And then you're applying history, rather than talking about things that happened in the past. You're talking about what we can do today based on that learning. And then in maths, you know, maths, I don't always have the examples because I don't know maths well enough, but ultimately everything that we study in maths, somebody came up with that formula or that problem or that equation because they were trying to solve a problem, or they were looking for a solution to a problem, or trying to work some situation out. And if we just told that story whenever we introduce a new mathematical problem in the maths classroom, rather than it just being at the top of a worksheet that you then have to fill in 20 questions, if we just told that brief story of, and the person who discovered this was trying to work out, you know, how much X he needed to do his Y, you know, that is enough to apply that's where this function comes from. It can all be applied, but it so rarely is.
I think there's a couple of things there. I think I think history, you know, if I try and think of an example, I am not really interested in people being able to recount the start and end year of the reign of Henry VIII.
Right.
But bias alert, I am a social scientist. I am interested in, you know, how did Henry VIII's family values affect modern
Exactly right.
society, you know?
Exactly right.
So those sorts of things are much more interesting. You know, in the maths world, I do think we spend too much time doing maths and not enough time doing numeracy. I mean,
I think
if
you're right.
one is to go on, you know, world league tables, the PISA and other things, which I'm, just as a side note, I'm not a fan of at all.
Yeah,
But on those, you know, we find that countries that kind of push their children to do 18 hours of study a day on numbers and so on, unsurprisingly, on numbers are brilliant at the age of 15 of calculating things in the top of the head. Of course, there's a whole host of other issues that they're not so good at. But the issue around that is because I think we do too much, in my view. You know, as not a maths teacher, we do too much of maths, which is abstract. You know, a maths teacher will tell you that a maths teacher doesn't do numbers, as odd as that sounds. But again, when we do English, you know, I can't recall all of my lessons, and that's quite normal. But I think maybe there is an imbalance, certainly in the schools in the UK, there is an imbalance of, okay, well, we have double English literature and double English language. So we'll spend as much time reading a Shakespeare play, which of course is always translated into modern English,
right,
but ruins it. We'll spend as much time doing that, which may not be of interest to anyone anyway, and we'll spend the same amount of time learning, you know, how sentences are formed. But really what you should be doing is, I think, threading all the subjects together. So the idea that you do double English literature to read Shakespeare, well, actually, hang on, shouldn't I really learn a bit about Shakespeare and how friendly he was with the Tudors in the history lesson? And then you can, so I think we don't thread, we see these subjects as isolated. You know, they're taught in a silo, and I think the problem is, though, that you know, I fully believe in qualified teachers, but then they get their subject with it, and then they teach that subject. However, occasionally you'll see some teachers filling in for others, and I tell you, it's wonderful to, you know, have somebody who's maybe a history teacher that fills in to do the social sciences lesson. So I think there's not enough. For the want of a better term, there's not enough cross-pollination of subjects.
No, that's right,
maybe we need to get teachers to do more time in each other's lessons, and then we'll start to thread things together. That's maybe an interesting topic for another day.
I think a topic for another day. Interdisciplinary curricula, I think is the future, and whether we'll actually get there or not is a different matter. But it's what I think we should be heading towards.
But I suppose, sorry to interject, I suppose though, I wonder if that, as a separate debate, but I wonder if the idea of that will help us formulate more about what is academic, what is vocational.
Yeah, well, I think the other way. I mean,
that will be the same in all subjects.
Yeah, that's it. The concepts, I think, definitely bleed into each other. It's no surprise it's come up now. You talked about the literature and the language, and so there you've got basically that dichotomy again of applied and abstract. So the reading of Shakespeare in whatever form you might be doing it is an academic exploit. It's for abstract purposes. You're reading for the sake of reading. Over in the literature class, you're learning about grammar and sentences. But you know, if we looked at the literature that we read, and I mean, again, I'd like to see that the reading list updated a little bit as well. But again, maybe that's another conversation. If we spent some of our time in literature class, not just you know, expanding the list of authors that we can name and sound intelligent about, without really thinking much about the content and its purposes and points, but then also looking at what makes good writing in the context of these different texts and authors, which by now, as I say, talk about updating, by now should include things like blogs and, I mean, Facebook updates maybe is the most extreme. I mean, it should be far broader than reading plays from 500-600 years ago.
If you could get them then to go and write their own blog or have some
exactly
sort of
right, so if they can use that to inspire and improve their own writing, then again, you've taken something that's typically considered purely academic and you've applied it. You said, you know, we can spend some time reading and then we can apply that into your own writing to make you a better writer, because we all write. We don't all write plays, but we all write.
But I mean, the last 10 years alone, certainly children, you know, teenage children at school now, generally speaking, will be at least once a day, writing things all the time. They'll be Facebook posting and tweeting and DMing on Snapchat, and so they're already doing that. So I mean, again, here's another subject for another day. I despise the fact that some schools have children hand their phones in at the start of the day and have them locked in a box. Let's just get rid of technology, shall we? But I think there's another interesting area to thread. So, for example, you know, I have no issue, as old as the book is, that Lord of the Flies could still be read in a class. But then, why doesn't that then generate a discussion on, I don't know, let's have a debate around the pros and cons of the arguments that when people are in a crowd, they lose their mind. That's common. Protests going on today, and you know, groups of people were, you know, I just think we miss. I mean, we could come up with a host of ideas, I'm sure, but you know, there are some so obvious examples. Yet what we do is we silo. But then what happens? Certainly, again, I'll speak for this country. We have a curriculum which is too often controlled by central government. I believe in a fundamentally, you know, in a foundation of a curriculum, but then let the teachers do what they do best, which is teach, and let them work out how to apply it. You know, issues we mentioned briefly at the top of the show around, you know, league tables and how they're formed, but you've got to go, once the teacher is in the subject, they can't help but silo themselves because they've got certain things they've got to tick off, because guess what, if they don't, the school loses funding, and if you lose funding, you can't teach anybody. So the teachers, we find, and this is a great thing that we're doing the Rebel Network, but it's difficult, isn't it, initially for teachers to rebel, because the system they're in kind of is about exploring, helping young people, or people of any age in any education. Lifelong learning is important, you know, how to help people open their minds. But really, you've got to do it in this conformist way with a very restricted curriculum, and so you're already closing the door in their face before you're trying to open it. So it's you know, it's so related to how we grade and how we mark, but without those, the current model means the school wouldn't get the funding. So I think this is a good place to point out what's important to always point out, is that, you know, obviously there are some teachers out there that are doing good work, and examples that you've just brought up, like the literature classes and tying, you know, hundreds of years old literature to current events. It's good teachers that are doing that. It's not the curriculum, but there are good teachers out there that are doing that, but it requires the teacher to kind of take that on himself or herself to tie those those two things together. In spite of the system, rather than
exactly right. So I think it's worth pointing out. You know, always point out where it's being done, but where it's being done, as you say, it's being done in spite of the system, and it's still a massive problem because those teachers are having to work twice as hard to do something that's they should be doing anyway, in yours and my opinion. The other thing you brought up there,
set up will hopefully bring them out.
Hopefully, we'll be able to, you know, get more of those people connected. Exactly right. Yeah. The other thing you mentioned there, just in passing, but I think ties in very nicely to the subject we started with, the academic and vocational, which I'd like to shift towards this idea of applied, which is valuable and useful, versus abstract, which is usually useless. You mentioned lifelong learning, and as a subject there, I tend to think that, you know, anything that we might think of as adult education, so post school and post college, you know, whatever kind of formal further education people go into, anything else then is usually under the banner of vocational, right? Because they're learning within a professional context. You don't get many people outside of the university model. You don't get many people entering into, you know, education on their own times for the more academic pursuits. Not to say it doesn't exist or shouldn't exist, but it's just not the common trajectory in lifelong, the model of lifelong learning, which we don't have, but what it is now, as it stands now, is usually school is for academic studies, and, you know, the further education beyond that is for the vocational studies, because, you know, that's what people need. I would like to see, as we've already, you know, tried to shift that definition so that it's applied learning in all of its forms, I would like to see that be the model from, you know, primary school, or, you know, nursery, preschool, through primary, right the way through college and into further education, where I think all learning should be applied, so that you go into a learning environment as a student so that you can learn to do things that will help you in your real world experience one way or another.
However, I mean, you talk about the life cycle there. I don't agree. Not that you have proposed this directly there, but I would challenge certainly our current system of having formalised education before the age of 6, 7, or 8. So I think there's a difficulty there. But that aside, I want to sort of approach your thing about things should be applied. How do you apply the obscure? So if you have a subject and you happen to finish your teaching 20 minutes early, and then you use that time to, I don't know, a debate comes up, apropos of nothing other than the fact that, but now I would say that they can apply that to being able to have a debate with somebody and
Exactly
have a
right.
disagreement without shouting. So do you see that the application of things can be, first of all, themselves not graded, but also they can come about through osmosis, they can occur without any sort of set direction? So when you say about application, are you saying that, well, really, what is it that couldn't be applied? I'm
This
trying
is
to
it.
think of the opposite.
That's it. My opinion is everything can be applied, and when you have,
But is it
occasionally, that's the difference, is whether it is or not. I think everything can be applied, but we know that most of stuff that's taught in school is not applied. Most of what's taught in the classrooms is very much not applied. You're learning this because it's on the curriculum, it's in the textbook, and it will help you pass the test. There's no discussion of what value this learning might actually have for you. I'm not saying you might not later apply it as an adult, but if you do, you're responsible for that application because the teacher doesn't find it for you.
But although people have different reactions to this, if you are reading, Midsummer Night's Dream in the classroom, and I don't happen to become an actor or a writer or whatever, but however, there are skills that arguably I'm picking up on waiting my turn when somebody else is doing something, to be able to be a bit more confident speaking in public. I mean, I'm trying to think of something that can't be applied, even if it's not written down on the curriculum, because on the lesson plan, it will say read chapter 3.
Yeah.
Now, that may not be applied, but everything else in can. So I'm just trying to think, I agree with you, we want to be able to have the things applied, but I can't think of a scenario where you can't apply what you've done even in a fixed classroom. So I think, are we not already applying things even if we can't find what they are?
Yeah, but the problem is, as a student, if you are to identify that application, if you are to be able to make the statement, oh, this thing that I've learned today, I am applying in this way, or I can apply in this way. If as a student you are making that statement, then 9 times out of 10, it's something that you have noticed, not something that your teachers have made clear to you. Because your teachers will tell you, you're reading this book so that you can pass the test. And if you are able to identify, oh, actually, there's more value in this than passing the test, it's not because your teachers told you that, it's because you identified that. My point is the role of the school environment should be more transparent application, right? Here are the things that you will be capable of. Here are the skills that you're developing. Here are the abilities that you will have that are applicable and applied, rather than here are a bunch of tests that we're preparing you for.
I think, I mean, in my example earlier, if we were to use that though, I am fine with, my student being slightly more confident after today's lesson, having had to read out 3 paragraphs of this chapter. They are naturally a little bit more confident, public speaking. I wouldn't necessarily need them to tell me that that's happened, and also it would be quite difficult for them to point it out in a way. But,
I think there's 2 important things there I want to come back on. First of all, directly to what you said is, it wouldn't be difficult if that were made a norm. So what I do at the end of my lessons, for example, is I ask my, one thing that's very common, the lesson format in most traditional schools is at the beginning of the lesson, the teacher will say, today I'm going to teach you X. And then they'll have a lesson, which might, various formats that it will take. And at the end of the lesson, the teacher will say, today you have learned X, right? What I do with my lessons is we go through the lesson, whatever format that takes. And at the end of the lesson, I ask my students, so what have you learned today? And they tell me, but today I've learned this, this, and this. And, you know, hopefully if I've done a good job, then most of them will say the things that I hope they've learned, but some of them will also say other things. You know, some of the students then, once I make that a norm, once that is the standard thing that we do in my lessons, and the students realize that, you know, they're on the lookout for their learning, students will then say things like, oh, I didn't feel confident about reading before, but now I feel more confident. Well, good. That's a thing that we've learned today that you've identified and you found the value of, rather than everybody, you know, being told today you're learning X.
Yes.
And then when the teacher then says, what have you learned? They say, oh, we learned X because that's what you told us we learned. So on the one hand, if you just allow that to happen, it works. It's just so uncommon. Students never get asked, what do you think you've learned today? What do you think the value of today's lesson was? That's never discussed. It's never focused on. The teacher will just say, you know, you've learned curriculum item 1.1 today. And that's the format of the lesson. And then the other thing is, again, grades coming up here. And I think perhaps if not our next episode, then one of our near future episodes will perhaps just be on grades and testing. When you focus on grades, it has a negative impact on the student exploration, because the students are coached to care about the score, and then they stop caring about anything else. Yeah. They actually find the easiest routes, they take shortcuts, they'll do less work because they know it's enough for the scores. So actually, by focusing on the scores and not focusing on the other value of learning, the other value of learning actually disappears, because the students ignore the value. And so you're actually, by not discussing it in the lesson, by not being transparent and explicit about the value of learning, the value goes away. Not only do they not recognize it, they don't actually receive it, because the value decreases the more you focus on the grades. So I think it's really important that we do make that transparent in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I see that. And then of course, if their cat dies on the morning of the exam, the whole thing goes to pot anyway.
Oh, you worked really hard for 12 years, but apparently you're an idiot, because on Friday morning at 9 o'clock you couldn't answer that question.
I think that could be a whole other network, never mind podcast, but I think it would be good to come back to that. I just want to come back to your sort of setting out there of what I would call bookending the lesson.
Yes.
Because we have, you know, as teachers, we have to generate lesson plans.
Yeah.
But they come from a term plan or a year plan. And unfortunately, in too many cases, I've seen, just mainly down to lack of time for the teachers,
which is a big problem.
Same plans get carried over and they're copied and copied.
Right, exactly.
Oh, where's your lesson plan? I think it's this one.
I wrote it 2 years ago. It must be somewhere.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But the bookending, I think, is important, because I'm able to do this a lot more easier, because my current teaching is private training in a private company. Right. So my sessions can be an hour, they can be a day, they can be a week, but they don't go past that. So I've not got to do a term, I've not got to, but I will bookend with the aims and objectives. So I think there's two things going on. You've got to bookend, because you've got to spell out at the start what you would like to achieve, but then you've got to revisit at the end. I quite like your idea of getting them to sort of introduce to you as the teacher their thoughts, and hopefully when you then bring the objectives back up, they'll be, well, remember we said we wanted to do this. So I quite like that. That's certainly something for me to reflect on, rather than me then going at the end saying, right, we were going to do this, do you agree? Yes, we
exactly,
did.
Yeah.
So that's good. But I think there's another thing that is important to split, and this is a general problem across organizations, businesses, is splitting the concept of objectives and aims. So if I want to do a lesson on colors, you know, my aim will be that we will have a conversation about primary colors, but then the objectives are specific. So I will want you to list the 3 primary colors in a short written test. So I think the problem that we do is we either keep everything as an aim, which is too woolly, or we make everything an objective. Now, we would argue maybe that everything is objective based, because you'll fill these 10 things, and then come the day of the exam, you'll pass the 10, and then we'll get our funding for next year. So I think not enough time is spent, though, on really defining the objectives that sit within the aim. And then, you know, the bookending, which we've talked about. So I think there's 2 things going on, and I don't see enough of. I sometimes see a start of either an aim or objective, or they then use them interchangeably, which is another problem. But very rarely do I see it at the end. So there's a few things going on there, I think, that we could learn in a more formalized way, but we don't want to be too prescriptive.
Right, exactly. I'm going to take that bookending idea a little bit further, and see what you think about it, because this is one of my more controversial opinions, I think. It's something I practice in the classroom. It's something I encourage my teachers to do as well, is I also don't do the objective announcement at the beginning of the lesson. So I do not begin my lessons with, here are the objectives of today's lesson. And when I ask at the end, what do you think you've learned? If they, I have objectives. So when I write my lesson plan, of course, I have my objectives on my lesson plan, but I don't announce them at the front of the lesson. And when I ask at the end of the lesson, what have we learned today? My hope is that at least a majority of the students will say something resembling what I have written on my lesson plan. The problem is, if you announce them at the beginning, then they'll say them at the end, because you've already told them what to say. And when I get to the end of the lesson, if the students are not able to give me an answer that resembles something on my lesson plan, then it means that I have not taught the lesson as clearly as I could have. It means I've not stayed on my aim. If they say the things that I hope they would say, then it means that we've achieved what I wanted to achieve, and we've genuinely achieved it because they noticed it themselves. If they're just saying it because I told them that's what I want them to say, it actually doesn't prove anything to me. It doesn't tell me that they learned it. It just tells me that they remember what I told them at the beginning of the lesson. So my approach is to have very clear objectives on my lesson plan, to teach a lesson that hopefully, from the way the lesson is structured and from the things that they actually feel they're learning in the lesson, they should be able to identify, oh yeah, today that I learned this, this, and this, and that should match what I have on my lesson plan. And if they say the right thing, if they say something in line with my objective, then I know I've taught effectively. If they say something completely else, then it can mean one of two things. It means either I didn't teach effectively and I missed the point, or it means that something, a positive side of that coin is something else arose out of the lesson that was perhaps more valuable than the thing I planned. But when you start the lesson and say, today we're going to learn X, Y, and Z, if then something else comes up in the lesson that's out of that bracket, the students sometimes feel like, oh, we'll get in trouble if we go off topic, so I better keep quiet. But if they haven't been told what the railroad is at the beginning of the lesson, then there's a lot more freedom for for digression during the lesson, which sometimes becomes more valuable than the thing that you had planned.
I was going to say, it can go off script, but that can be more beneficial sometimes. And also, though, that will help you inform, because maybe next time you want to drop in something that came out of that conversation. And I think, but you and I would imagine, neither of us have seen each other teach, but certainly from our many discussions about how we view, why as the most important three letters, in life, never mind in the classroom or in other educational settings. But it's interesting because I also don't do something at the end which is controversial. It's strange how these things are seen as controversial when we go, really? So I don't do happy sheets. I don't do, I don't put a photocopied piece of paper out and say to people, please, can you make sure you do the course evaluation at the end? Now, I do get some people who just go, well, you've got to do it. Well, first of all, if I don't agree with grading students, then I'm not going to agree with grading myself. That way, you get other issues that, in my position in a company, if I'm giving some people a test at the end of an induction, well, if you're starting in the company that very day, well, you're not going to give me a 1 out of 10, are you? Because you think you'll get into trouble. All of those sorts of things in there. But then there are some people who get educational training and go, well, you must evaluate the course. So, well, yes, but there are other methods of evaluation. I mean, one thing I'm constantly doing through my whole, whether it's an hour a week or a day, I'm constantly writing notes. Sometimes I'll actively go, do you know, that's a really good idea, and I'll make a note, and that will help me change my material and cause me to reflect. But them saying, well, how, you must evaluate your course, by not having a happy sheet, they're falling into the same trap of, when you say to somebody, I don't agree with the way that GCSEs are examined, the first reaction I get off everyone, well, you have to assess. Them. Well, who said that's the only way to assess? And it's these sorts of conversations that so I'm really interested now on not doing that formalized approach at the start, although from what I get from what you've said, you don't really formalize it at the end either, other than yourself. So really,
I have a hope. I always have a hope, but
always hope.
If every lesson if at the end of every lesson they're saying something that's wildly different from what's on my lesson plan, then that's something that I need to repair. If it happens occasionally, it could be worthwhile. But if every lesson I go in to teach A and they tell me they learn B, then eventually, I have to identify a problem there. But if I tell them we're going to learn A, they always say they learned A anyway, and I won't know if they did or not. The thing about evaluation, I mean, I think evaluation is really important, but I agree with you that, we already know, ironically, from self-report studies, but there are some of these that have been done fairly intelligently. We know that people are more likely to generally give positive reviews because they feel bad about giving negative reviews. So if you're putting it on like a Likert scale, where they're basically saying I liked it or I didn't like it, they're just conditioned to say they like things. So it's not very reliable. But I do think getting feedback, as I know you would obviously agree, feedback is important. There's two important things. The first is that end of course evaluation. If you do, I always want that to take a qualitative rather than a quantitative form. And the question that I've already given as an example, what do you think you learned today? What did you learn today? I like to ask the question, what can you do now that you couldn't do before the lesson? That's my feedback. It's not, rate me out of 10 or give me a smiley face or a sad face, but it's, what have you learned? What has been the value of the lesson? You tell me what you the value of today's lesson, what you enjoyed about the lesson, and what you didn't like. And I also like to ask them, do you have any questions that weren't answered during the class? These are the ways that I get, concrete feedback from them without it sounding like it's tinged negative or positive, but it's informative for me. And then the other thing as well that I find a problem, and you've already addressed this, as you say, you take notes throughout. The other big problem I find is for many, many teachers, they don't know whether a lesson has been successful or unsuccessful until the last minute when they do a quiz or something and all the students get a bad score or a good score. I know 10 minutes into my lesson, and then again 15, and then again 20 minutes, and again 25 minutes. I know at every step of the way if my lesson is going well or not. And if it looks like they're getting it or not, if it looks like it will be successful or not. I'm constantly kind of, checking the temperature, as you might say, throughout the whole lesson to see if we're on track and if we're doing well or not, rather than waiting until the end of the lesson, at which point it's too late to do anything about it.
I think there's a few things. Yes, there's a few things there. So first of all, when you do a score, let's say instead of 10, what really is the difference between somebody who gave you a 6 and somebody who gave you a 7? Do they know the difference? Do they think the same? And if you get an 8, wow, that sounds amazing. But why don't you say, well, why didn't you get a 9 or 10? And it's always difficult to score. The other thing I find is I've been in many an HR department in other companies, whereby all the results will come in, there's 4s and 5s out of 5, very good. They get to the one where there's a 2, they don't know what they're talking about anyway. So the whole thing
exactly right.
is rubbish. It's a bit like one of the reasons I have a problem with the great Ofsted in this country is that Ofsted results, if you have the word outstanding put on a sticker in your glass windowed lobby in your reception, Ofsted's a good thing. If you get a score that means you need improvement, then suddenly
you don't put it on the wall. Good. Yeah, exactly right.
So I think that there's the scoring element has its own problems anyway. If you do score everybody, of course, you should always use an even number of a score, never an odd, because they come in the middle, and that means even less.
Another debate. So, I agree with you. That's
the other
fiery
thing just
debate.
on the the other thing on the testing. Now, some of my courses are really easy because I might give you a 2-hour course in a subject that is based on a piece of legislation that we have to follow. Therefore, that is quite easy to be a bit rote and a bit,
sure.
But I will always give the material to take away, even for such a short course. But one of the good things about evaluation is that I had a course recently. It's a course I've done countless times, many, many hours. And in this one particular, I changed some questions on the test, and this one course, it turned out I don't I tell people they've passed, but I don't announce everyone's individual scores each time they give me back their paper. I mark it, and there was one question that about 40% of the class had got wrong. And one of the people actually said to me when I went through, saying, oh, this one in particular, a few of you didn't quite get right, so let's discuss it. So we go through. And one person put, oh, gosh, I got that wrong. I feel like an idiot now. And they were quite surprised to hear me say, no, it's probably because I didn't write the question very well.
Yeah,
and
obviously something unclear.
Surprised.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they were
really
surprised
good.
to hear me just say, well, yeah, it was actually, I did a rubbish job. And they were quite...
Which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole way that we saw... But just one thing I want to pick up there, though, you're talking about the kind of testing in a way as you're going on, because it's verbal and you listen to a lot
and you
of,
can just see, you can see their faces, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. We would call that, I suppose, ipsative is the kind of educational, you know,
although it's
as
just not
opposed to the summative or
formalized at all,
formative.
right? But
yeah. So, but that of course is going on all the time, and that's never
right.
recognised. But then when you can't say to somebody, you know, well, that version of my assessing of a student's ability or knowledge
doesn't have a percentage attached to it,
is that I'm happy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I need a B, or I need a 3,
right.
or
It's
I
got to
need,
have a percentage
no, I
attached.
can't give you that.
Yeah.
But this is then where we've got to trust teachers, because they know what they do. I mean, just linking very briefly to our friend coronavirus at the moment,
right.
in this country, we've had a massive problem around grading, because what they did is they couldn't grade in the normal way because students weren't able to come into the classroom and do their tests, their exams. And what then happened was they were going to get some system to work out grades. Turns out that the system wasn't very good, and they went back to their original idea of allowing the teachers to do, you know, the predicted grade. And I remember seeing a minister coming out saying, well, it's really important because we must trust the teachers and let them do the job that they're employed to do. Of course, the answer is, well, if you'd done that in the first place, they're already now discussing maybe doing the same again next year, because simply we don't know what position we're going to be in. And I'm really excited in a way, because now
hopefully they'll just keep it.
Why would
that'd be ideal.
So it's going to be interesting how that develops.
And the other thing that, I mean, there's trust in that. When you were talking, I want to go back to when you were talking about, just to close off the point about teacher evaluations as well, which has come up when you were talking about student scoring. The same problem with teacher scoring if you're relying on scores. You know, you said, for example, if the teacher gets mostly 7, 8, 9s, and then they get 1 or 2 2s, you look at those as anomalies and you ignore them. On the other hand, if you get, you know, an entire series of 2s and 3s, all you know is something about the lesson didn't satisfy the students, but it's useless information because you don't know what they didn't like. You don't know what about your practice needs to be improved. So that's, you know, 1 out of 5 or 3 out of 10 or whatever it is. It's just useless information. It's just it's just upsetting. Oh, obviously I didn't do a good job today. I don't know why. I don't know what I could do to improve. So it's just completely useless when you compare it to some, you know, qualitative feedback. What did you like? What could I change? What would you prefer to do differently? These questions that students can answer with, you know, information that's helpful.
Very briefly on that, I remember a question on a happy sheet that said something like, I was in a course with another group of people in another company, but they were using a training room in a premises that wasn't their own. So one of the questions was, you know, how did you rate the premises?
Facilities.
How was the environment? And one of them had given like a really low score, and we were like, well, the chairs were quite comfy and it was well lit. We couldn't. And it turns out that even though he hadn't raised the objection at the time, he gave that really poor score because he didn't like the array of sandwiches available at lunchtime at the buffet. So sometimes the qualitative is the only way to go.
yeah, exactly right. The other thing that you mentioned as well, because I don't know whether I should make the assumption here, and I think it's probably a safe assumption to make. You talked about, as an example, maybe training some employees on policy, for example. And, you know, you said that has a tendency to fall into the rote. But even there, I mean, you could either take the approach of, you know, reading out the policy, get them to read out the policy, get them to repeat the policy, you know, get them to basically memorize the policy, and then give them a quiz at the end. Say, okay, did the policy say this or this? You could do the gap fills to make sure they'd memorized the policy, which would be, you know, abstract, rote-based learning. Or, and I will be as bold as to assume that you do something more along these lines, where you will ask them, okay, so in your day-to-day practice at the office, you know, in this situation, what would you do? If that happens, how would you respond, right? At which point you've taken something and it's just applied, right? You say, okay, here's the policy. How is that going to affect your day-to-day operations at the office?
Yeah, so a bit of a blend, really. So the application, I can give you an example of where we're teaching people about regulations around how you dispose of waste in a business.
Right.
Depending on the type of waste, they're very specific. You need specific paperwork, and I need to know when they go away, and you know, what has to appear legally. There might be 10 things on the paperwork, but legally 5 of them have to be filled in. Otherwise, you're literally breaking the law. So we will go through that. We'll do worked examples. The bit I find as interesting, or probably more interesting for me, is when we have a little sidebar just before we go to lunch, and we end up having a debate on, do people recycle properly at home? Now that has come out of the training where we're doing rote, but that is so valuable because, of course, that without wanting to self-aggrandize, that is literally to do with the future of the planet, and you're having a really useful social discussion, but you're able to do it in the context that is related to what you're talking about. So they will have to come away with a certain level of knowledge, and I think the number, we were talking about the number 3 before we came on, weren't we? And this applies, if you can get someone to say it out loud, if you can get someone to write it down, and let's go the other one, you can get someone to apply it as well, when they've been able to do it several times. But as you rightly really said earlier, if you get someone, even if it's for 2 years at GCSE level, to constantly look at something and then write it back out on a bit of revision, really, as you've already said, once they release it for the final time onto the paper from their pen on exam day, it flushes out and it doesn't become so it's I think really that's going back to what you said earlier, but I think it's constantly coming back to me about this applying, whereas I went with the quite nebulous, well, everything is applied even if you don't realize. But I think we've had a useful discussion on, we as teachers have to be clear, don't we, on what we want them to be able to apply.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, the nature of certainly teenage education in this country is certainly that they do have to achieve grades at the moment. So we have but we in our own way, we sneak in little debates and conversations.
Exactly right.
So and occasionally, you are going to have somebody who does happen to do that thing I don't like of reading Shakespeare in a classroom, but then they're going to go on to become the next Harold Pinter or Alan Bed.
Exactly right.
You know what I mean? So there is that. But then we've already said about the way you thread it through. So if you told them about the concept of what it is to be a writer, rather than necessarily just reading something they've written, so there's a whole approach there. But certainly, just to conclude on the evaluation, the same way as grading, really, we instinctively are able to evaluate and grade without needing numbers. But the balance is, and we recognise to everyone watching here, is that you also have to apply to your own standards in your own country, your own school. So it's that interesting balance, isn't it? How far can we, how much can we actually push against the fence?
I mean, what I found in my own practice and the teachers that I work with is that all of this is completely doable. Qualitative feedback, alternative assessment formats, all of these are completely doable, even when you have an incredibly formalized grade-based system like the one I work in, and most countries, really. It's all doable. The problem at the moment is you can't replace the grades. You can't drop the grades in favor of the other stuff. So what you have to do, and what I do, is you have to do it as well. So, okay, here's, I've got to do the grades. I can't not. I'll lose my job if I don't. But aside from the grades, which, by the way, I don't really care about, aside from the grades, which I have to give you, I'm also going to give you this feedback here, which tells you, exactly what I think. And you've told me what you think. And together, we've kind of come up with a conclusion about how valuable this year or this unit has been for you. And then you also get the grade over here, which, you should take or leave. It's part of the system. This is the bit that really matters. And just one point for anybody who's listening that this is news to and might want to try this out. It's important, if you're going to do that you give the qualitative feedback separate from and before the grade. Because as soon as you give the grade, unfortunately, as we've already said, the students have been coached, they've been trained to think one way, and as soon as they see the grade, that's all they care about. If you give them a grade and then you give them some feedback, they don't look at the feedback because they already got the grade. If you give them the feedback first, have a discussion about the feedback, get their thoughts and responses, and then give them the grade, the feedback will sink in much more. So that's an important point for teachers.
And I think that will help, actually, because there's a problem I was thinking of, but what that has already helped to maybe give something, teachers, for example, that are giving out grades, or it's when they're congratulating or consoling, isn't it?
Yes.
By complete logical reason, and just being a nice human being. You'll say to the person who's jumping up and down screaming for joy that have got an A, triple star, or a 1, or whatever we use these days, it's very confusing, they've got the highest score, of course you're going to say well done, brilliant. You're not going to use that point. And I'm very careful that on the results day I don't talk about how terrible this all is. On that day, of course you're going to actually say, well,
they've
done,
worked so
brilliant,
hard for it. Exactly right.
Now we know that will die down eventually. They'll go away and have a party and then forget about it. But what we also do is little Sarah in the corner who didn't get the grade she wanted. We then go over to her in the same room that we've just congratulated Michael for getting his great results. And we try to explain to them in not so many words that it doesn't really matter what you've done on one particular day of your life. So even the way that we respond to the highs and the lows in the same room when they're getting their grades, we're telling them two completely different stories. I would argue, certainly the teachers I know, by and large, agree with the you're not graded on one particular day.
But absolutely
it's a difficult thing, is it? Because we can't go to the other person that's jumping up and down and go, well, that doesn't matter, because of course that wouldn't be nice if nothing else.
No, exactly right.
We do tell two completely different stories to two different people in the same room on the same day, having taken the same assessment.
Although I would say
in
maybe
itself shows you that it's broken beyond repair.
Although I would say, again, just going on how I approach that, is I tell one story from the beginning of the year rather than waiting. So by the end of the year, obviously if you do well on the test, you feel good, and if you don't do well on the test, everybody's going to feel that, even if they know that the test score isn't the end of the world. Everybody's going to have a reaction. But, I make sure that from day one, this is already threaded into A, the way I teach, B, the way I assess, and C, the way we apply the learning and just the discourse that we have, that they know from day one that it's not really about the score. So that when the day, the end of the year comes and, she's got a great score and he's got a low score, there'll be a reaction. There won't be void of emotion, but both of them will have a lesser reaction than the extremes they would have felt, because they've both been part of this ongoing discourse where they both realize that, okay, I feel good about it today, or I feel bad about it today, but I already know that there's a bigger picture. If you're waiting to the end, it's too late.
I'm picturing this almost comedic sketch where you start off the lesson. Day one, right, students, you are going to get a grade at the end of the year, but whether it's a really good one or a really bad one, I'm just going to go, nah. So they kind of hand that seed set. But we kind of do that in our own kind of way, don't we? And
it's a bit more subtle, and it has to be subtle for it to be meaningful, but basically,
By that time as well, you will have, with a large amount, but not all, by the nature of it, you will have developed a relationship with your students anyway, at whatever level, so that, if they're really, really happy, they tend to just go off and have a party. If they're really sad, they'll come back to you. And the fact that they've come back to you and sought consolation means that you've got that relationship. And that's the thing that matters much more than a piece of paper, as we know. That's an interesting approach that we can all reflect on, I think.
So I think there's the beginnings of a new conversation here. So I think, as I say, one of our, maybe if not our next episode, then one of our next episodes perhaps should be on the matter of grading and testing, something that I think we both are quite passionate about. So to finish off the application, this is me putting words perhaps in your mouth. We began this episode.
Does this meet your lesson plan?
We began the session, the episode today, saying that we were going to talk about vocational and academic. We've ended, or at least I have, kind of eschewing those terms and going for this idea of application and applied learning. So what do you think, the way that I came in with slightly different definitions from you, and really kind of, I've put all of my emphasis on this idea of applied learning. Where do you stand on that now? What do you think about it?
It's interesting, because I have changed my mind during the course of the show, because I came in, didn't I, arguing that I'd kind of concluded what I thought, but then I can't remember the exact words I was used. I remember thinking back half an hour, whatever it's been, I remember thinking back to, gosh, I've come on saying that I've concluded what I think, and already I'm beginning to unravel my own thought process. So I've come to the conclusion now that we need to really do away with the words. We need to stop.
I think so too.
Talking about academic, vocational. I mean, you talk about applied. We've had the only problem I have, not that you mean it this way, the only problem I have with applied is that if you talk to certainly politicians in this country, they believe there's only two things that learning is for, and that's either to get a grade to go on to the next course, or to automatically achieve a job at the end of the course. So they will hear the phrase applied, and we've discussed some of the nuance in that today. People, the politicians here, the people outside of education, I think the word applied, it sounds quite, I was going to say academic. It sounds very prescriptive, and it sounds very almost like leaning to I'm going to tell you at the start, you're going to do these 4 things, and that's what you're going to be tested on. That's not what we mean here today. But whatever the word we go for is, I mean, we already have the word. It's learning. So the learning we have, we need to stop. I would argue, this is something for me to discuss with others, we need to stop using the terms vocational academic. There we go, because the use of them in the first place is giving the impression of a divide. And then even if we claim that they're on the same priority, it's still creating these bubbles which just don't exist. So I'm going to conclude by thinking that I need to stop using the words, and eventually if enough people do, they'll fall out of use. Long time to go, but I think that's kind of where I am now, subject to further debate. Course.
Sure. Yeah. Which I'd be, be good to pick up if you do talk to other people, and move any further or go back in any other direction. It'd be good to bring that back up on a future episode. For the sake of applying the discussion that we've had here today, just for the
F- for that, Karl.
There's a gold star segue there, Lee. Just for the sake of making it applicable though to teachers, maybe what you've just said is also true about how the system is built up. And in fact, there's several things that we've not talked about today that I hoped we would. So we might come back to this from a slightly different perspective in the future. But because we have this model that at the moment is built on the false dichotomy of academic and vocational. And so when we talk about applied learning, as we have done here, it can be perhaps difficult to see in the first instance how to apply that in the classroom, when at the end of it all you've either got to give a grade or you've got to give a test. The great thing here, as with the tests, and when I talked about testing and grading and the different kinds of feedback we can give, the same is quite true for application here. You can still teach the curriculum because you have to teach the curriculum, and you can still give the tests because you have to give the tests. The application part, which I think is the most valuable part, can also be done through asides and discourse. So you can still teach these are the dates and the data and the facts and the points that you need to remember them, and we'll do some memory-based activities to make sure you remember them. But then also we can just kind of have a bit of a chat about them. And for my money, that's where the value is. This is the bit we have to do, but you can still do that and have the applied conversation where you ask the students what they think about it, what the value is. And by the way, one thing that we know quite well through various studies and research is that bit makes it all more memorable anyway. If it's applied, if the students can understand it subjectively and contextually, then they remember the facts and the data and the details more anyway.
Yeah, and I think although we've gone away, largely speaking, from rote learning, although to be honest, I haven't listened to how a 6-year-old does maths, the times table in the classroom recently. But
exactly right. Now, still the same.
Yes, we've certainly gone away largely from the idea of rote for most things or everything. But thinking on how to apply that, see, I can do it too. Thinking of how to apply that in the workplace, there are cases where you're going to have to get people to remember specific processes or procedures or something, and that again, we know the way that you do it through repetition and a bit of theory and a bit of practical and all that, so all of that still applies, but it is there that the workplace will still oh gosh, it doesn't even need to be a workplace. There's things you have to do in the home. You have to do things in a certain way, in a certain order. But you also have to deal with things that go outside the norm. And I think for me, just to conclude, from my side, I do want to pick up on one thing you absolutely said, right, and it is to the people watching and listening to this. Please carry on doing what you're doing, because despite all the rules and the restrictions and everything, you're still teaching the way that you think you should teach. You're doing it in a slightly restricted way because you're not able to fully do what you really can do and want to do, but you absolutely are doing the right thing, but because you're developing people and you're helping them to learn. So please do take, if anything today, from the message of, we know that you are stuck in some ways with rigid rules and requirements, but if you look at your practice, if you look at how you teach and so on, you are still doing the things that you want to do. So just keep threading those in.
No, I think that's a perfect place to end. Oh, the only thing I will add is, if there's anybody out there to whom Lee was not just speaking because you don't agree with us, then I'd love to hear from you, right? So, you know, I at this moment still think everything we've said here is you know, worth thinking about, and I feel quite strongly about what we've talked about here and some of the points I've made here. As Lee said, if you're already on board with this, or if during the course of this conversation you've come around to some of the things we're talking about, that's great, and keep it up, and we'd love to hear from you about how you're doing it in your schools. If you haven't come around, then I'd love to hear from you as well, because you might convince me that I'm wrong, or we might be able to, you know, reach a shared conclusion somewhere. So I'd love to hear from people that are listening to this, whatever your thoughts are. And as Lee said, you know, keep up the good work, and hopefully you found this interesting, useful, applicable, and once again, just a reminder to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're not, then head over to the Rebel Teacher Network channel on YouTube for more from Lee and myself, but also a number of other shows that we have on the network that are all in a similar theme, but from some quite different voices and perspectives. And I'll see you there. Thanks a lot again, Lee. I'll see you again next week.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.